Hello and welcome back to episode 2 of Storytelling with me, Tom Hendrick, your public speaking coach. So what I'll quickly do is explain what we're doing in this episode, and then we'll do a little recap of what we did in episode 1. So this episode is all about the use of conflict as your communication choice for storytelling. And we're going to learn all about the benefits of conflict and why you should include it in your stories and how you can use it. So the real reason that we use conflict in our storytelling is that it acts as a hook for the audience. Conflict by its nature is unresolved. And so by putting unresolved and interesting and tense things in our story, the audience starts to question what might happen next. They might even start to visualize themselves making decisions on behalf of the characters who are in the middle of conflict. And then they stick around to the end of the story where those conflicts and questions that are interesting might get resolved. And so that's what we're going to be learning about today, a way of making our stories more interesting, but also more engaging so we can keep people for longer. In the last episode, we talked about how powerful it is to use visually descriptive language. And we did the aphantasia test, where people figured out about themselves whether their brain is really good at generating images in their head, if it struggles a bit to generate images in their head, or if it does it really clearly and effortlessly, or if you have things like hyperphantasia or synesthesia, you figure out if your brain is someone who has overactive imagination and really gets excited that when an image starts to formulate in their head, their brain starts to continue to formulate that image unprompted, in a very creative and flurrying process. When we discover where our brain fits on this continuum, we start to understand where our aptitude for storytelling might be. People who have aphantasia, an inability to generate images in their head, might struggle to be able to conjure an image in their head and use that as their script. So they might have to work a bit harder at their storytelling. But then people who have hyperphantasia, where generating images in your head is really easy, might struggle to contain the detail of their story because they have so many distracting images continuously coming into their head that they need to sort of become more compliant and contain their storytelling so it doesn't waffle on. People with synesthesia will have sensory crossover. They might find themselves being intensely affected by stories or storytelling. And people like me who sit second from the left on this continuum can tell stories, but they have to pedal the bike really hard to keep the lights on. So generating those images is difficult and they come and go. And so irrespective of where you are in this continuum, you can improve your storytelling skills. And it's just helpful to know where you sit so that you know what your strengths are likely to be and what your weaknesses are likely to be. The other really good thing about this framework is that it lets us understand that the vast majority of audiences, like 99 people out of 100, can see images in their heads if we use visually descriptive language. And so this sort of goes to show why storytelling is such an effective medium. If the point of communication is that the speaker says something to the audience and that the audience has to say something back in order for it to be engaging communication, then if most people have the ability to generate images in their heads, then speaking in a visually descriptive way is good storytelling principles, because the audience will be saying something back. Namely, they'll be imagining that image in their head. And so that's a subtle thing to detect when you're a speaker. If you're a comedian, it's easy to detect if people are laughing, and that determines that you're speaking successfully. If you're a storyteller, it's a little bit harder and more subtle to detect that people are imagining when you're storytelling, but it is possible to detect it on their faces. You can tell that they're looking at you, not say their phone. You can tell that the image they're generating in their head is either pleasant or unpleasant, and you can see that on their facial expressions. Another thing we talked about last time, we touched on this relatively briefly, is this very professional storytelling framework, the Storycircle. The Storycircle is a means of structuring a story in 9 parts, where as we go around the circle, we encourage the storyteller to make the character reactive in the first half, proactive in the second half as they go up the circle. But more importantly, it's a reminder for storytellers that when they put ideas and words down in a certain topic, like use describing a character, an ordinary character in their ordinary world, that those words shouldn't be forgotten. Instead, we can use the potential energy that exists in those words when they're said at the beginning, and we can release that potential energy at another point in the story, say lose. And also at the end, when the character changes and rises to a new normal and new occasion in their life. And so we mentioned last week the Lion King as an example, where Simba begins his adventure in the Lion King as a young, petulant Lion King wannabe. So essentially a child who wants to be an adult and take on the aspirations and the responsibility of being a king. And when Simba becomes the worst version of himself in Lose, he is not a child but an adult, but he's behaving like a child instead of aspiring to behave like an adult. So you have this potential energy of a child wanting to be a king, and then you have here the rightful king remaining a child and being the worst version of himself. And so that is an example of reminding storytellers to use potential energy and to actualize it in their stories. This way, we're storytelling very effectively, and we have the ability to tell stories that last a long time in people's memory because we're using the words to work together instead of relying on individual ideas to make our story interesting. And what we're going to do is continue using the story circle, but we're going to add an extra element in there. We're not just going to do the topics. We're not just going to create and release potential energy in our ideas. We're not just going to speak in a visually descriptive way. We're going to add this extra element, the use of conflicts, external, internal, and also this third one, growing conflict. And we'll talk about that just now. And all I want you to remember is that when it comes to storytelling and communication, the storyteller, the communicator is saying something, but when we're writing and preparing and delivering our stories, we should always be thinking, what is the audience saying back to us as the speaker? Because everything that we say as a storyteller that isn't setting up and delivering visual descriptions and engagement is improvable, removable storytelling. So conflict. Why should we add conflict to our stories? Well, first of all, conflict is two clashing ideas that are unresolved. If we think of, say, a character getting into trouble, we have a character and the trouble they're in as two ideas that have now clashed together in the story. We don't know what's going to happen to the character. We don't know what's going to happen to the trouble. If the character, does certain things, they can get out of that trouble. If they do the wrong things, they could get into further trouble. We don't know what might happen next. These are two ideas in a state of clash that are not yet resolved. And that's what we mean by conflict. The reason why this is a powerful storytelling technique is because putting these unresolved clashing moments in the story is going to raise many, many questions in the audience's mind, like what's going to happen next? What should they do? What would happen if they did that? And now we're a storyteller where we're saying something to the audience that is describing a conflict, and the audience is saying something back. That is, in their mind, they're starting to think about all the options and outcomes available to the characters in question. This results in the audience becoming hooked. They now listen in anticipation of an answer to these unresolved questions. They are also given some agency and something to do in the story wherein they can make their own choices for the character. And the story is continuing in their own heads. They're not just listening to a story. They're actually, in their own mind, participating in the story and waiting for what the answer at the back of the book is that the speaker will reveal later in the story. That's why conflict is really powerful, because although the visual descriptions are engaging, if the visual descriptions were to somehow lose their hook on the audience and you didn't have another hook, you're at risk of the story being ignored, forgotten, and the audience zoning out. And once you've lost an audience in a story, it's hard to get them back again. And also the point of a story is to constantly engage and entertain and to have people continue the story in their own mind. And so what we want is we need to use visual descriptions and conflict and other hooking devices simultaneously, so that should the visual description hook fail, the conflict hook can still have a chance of engaging the audience. While the audience is still hooked because they're thinking about conflict, and we continue to speak in conflicts and visual descriptions, and a subsequent visual description can rehook the audience, such that if the conflict loses the audience, because we have an opportunity to rehook them with a visual description that might keep them yet again. So now we have no single point of failure in our story. And this is very smart storytelling that is interested in doing productive work during the story. What are the things that we can say that the audience can do something with that information? And how do we make it as enjoyable and as favorable to the audience as possible? So here are 3 different kinds of conflicts. We have internal conflict. This is the idea that these are things that you can't see, but you can often hear almost inside the character's head. So these are situational things or thoughts, like a character being in doubt. You imagine a story where a character's walking down a hall, the hall suddenly splits into 2, a left and a right. I don't know which way to go. I'm not familiar. I've lost myself. Now that's a means of introducing internal conflicts. The character being in a state of hesitation, doubt, there's options, they don't know which one to pick. You can also include things like fear. You could also include things like questions in the character's mind that they can't answer or that they answer incorrectly. To use The Lion King as another example, I believe there's a question early in the story where Mufasa asks Simba, what does it mean to be king? And Simba says, getting to do anything you want. And that's a state of internal conflict because a question's been asked of Simba and he's got it wrong. And so the audience is aware of the fact that because Simba's gotten this question wrong, he's got more to learn. This advice that he relies on, or his understanding of the world being flawed, might lead him astray. There's this sense of, this child is at risk of being eaten up by the world. And so posing questions and have your characters get them wrong or hesitate about them or have people disagree or have people become fearful of them, these are all examples of internal conflict, using the situation or people's thoughts to tell a story. More overtly, we can talk about external conflict. So these are things that you can see. This is like a fight breaking out. So who's going to win? Is anyone going to get hurt? Who's going to stop this fight? What's going to happen next? Arguments. So now we have people shouting at each other. It's overt. We can see it. And, so who's going to win? How's it going to escalate? Blah, blah, blah. External conflicts are another means of engaging audiences. A third means of engaging audiences is this idea of growing conflict. These are domino effect situations. Growing conflict is a great way to create potential energy in your story and then release it at a really pivotal moment. And often the most interesting parts of a story build up to and then actualize growing conflict. So this might be your character having to tell a lie, and the more that they tell this lie, the deeper and deeper trouble they're potentially getting in. And then at some point, their lie will be revealed and it will unravel everything. And in that moment, when one of the characters becomes seemingly heartbroken by, say 2 characters are talking to each other and the person confesses the lie, and then they turn around and there's a character there who's now the victim of that lie, and they were being lied to the whole time. They then run out of the room crying. That situation is now unresolved, and the main character has so many now conflicts, internal and external, that can pop into that scene thanks to growing conflict. And so now they're probably thinking, oh no, if that person was the love of my life, they might never trust me again. I have to chase them. What if I don't catch them? What if they don't want to talk to me anymore? I never get to explain why I lied, for a good reason. Did I do the right thing? Did I do the wrong thing? Am I angry at my friend for getting me to reveal this lie before I was ready? Again, like a growing conflict is this idea that one thing happens and a domino effect happens. One bad thing leads to another. And an example of this in storytelling is really prevalent in, say, every action movie you've ever seen ever. You've probably all seen a movie that has something like 2 characters on like a small vehicle in, say, Italy, Rome. There's a lot of ancient architecture everywhere. There's bumpy cobblestone roads, and these 2 characters that hate each other reluctantly have to work together on the back of this tiny motorcycle. They're going at high speeds illegally through all the alleyways and the roads, bumping up and down everywhere, knocking over buildings and other stuff that's really valuable. They've got a whole host of mobsters behind them shooting at them, causing more damage, and they might get shot at any moment. They might run over a pedestrian or cause an explosion at any moment. They're shooting guns back at the mobs one at a time, causing one to explode, and then domino effects, causes lots of other explosions behind them. At the whole same time they're shooting, they're having an argument with each other, and also one of them has a secret, like they're a double agent that they're withholding from the other person. At the same time, they're traveling at breakneck speeds to get to a helicopter, which could take off at any moment with a person in it who they need to save, and they might not be able to save them in time. And if they do, then the bomb will be on them, on the helicopter, and the bad guys will win. And so you can see that action movies often have a lot of conflicts layered on top of each other like that in a single scene. Because if the stunning images of Rome don't keep you, the visual descriptions, then maybe the relationship conflict will, maybe the action conflict will, maybe the race to the bomb and the helicopter will. And so it's really hard to turn away from an action movie like that, because there are so many hooks keeping the audience wondering what happens next. And one of the biggest failings of storytelling is when a story becomes, even though it's full of conflict, so predictable, so cliche, so we've seen this a million times, that those conflicts, although being present, don't actually stir those what if, what happens next thoughts in the audience head, because they know everything's going to work out fine. A really good example of someone overcoming the numbing effect of cliches in storytelling recently was, or relatively recently, was George R.R. Martin in Game of Thrones. His device for storytelling was to deliberately set up a main character, Ned Stark, have them killed off in the first book. And because of that, every other seeming main character in the book became at risk of also being killed off or getting into serious, gruesome trouble. And so by committing that conflict and that idea in their story and no one being safe, we could actually get true engaging storytelling instead of pretend storytelling that has conflict in it, but not real conflict. Real conflict being when the audience genuinely has unanswered questions in their head about what might happen next. We can see how conflict has been used by famous storytellers throughout history, and we can visualize this in many different ways. One of my favorite ways of visualizing this is a lecture given by a storyteller, Kurt Vonnegut. He has a lecture called The Shape of Stories. It's very entertaining. He's a very humorous and witty person. And he goes through a number of famous stories, and he shows you how conflict has this ability to bend, create potential energy and release it throughout a story. And it doesn't matter what shape your story takes. It's just important that it has a shape, and it uses conflict to shape the story. Again, conflict creates storytelling potential energy and releases it. We're using the words to work together. We're setting up conflicts so that we can have a resolution. Words work a lot better together than alone. So Kurt Vonnegut in his lecture goes through all these different kinds of stories. If we just look at this graph and we look at the green line, we have the story of Cinderella. We start off on this graph. Anything below the line is where the character is in a state of ill fortune, or they're in a bad situation. And anything above the line, they're in a state of good fortune. They're happy. And as we progress from left to right, it's the timeline of the story. So Cinderella starts off miserable. Her father is dead. Her stepmother is taken over the house. She's enslaved in her own house. She's got these ugly stepsisters. But then there's the promise of meeting the prince and going to the ball, and she can go if only she can get a dress in time, and she gets a dress in time. And then what it doesn't show is that she isn't allowed to go to the ball, so she would become sadder then. But what she does do is she gets a fairy godmother to grant her a wish, and she's ecstatically happy because she's able to go to the ball, dance with the prince, be anonymous. But then she gets discovered, and she gets discovered, and she goes back to not being to being unhappy again. But at least she's a little bit happier than she was at the beginning, because at least she had her dance. Eventually, the prince goes looking for her. The prince finds her. They marry. They're happily ever after, infinite happiness for the end of the story. And so we can see that there are numerous instances of conflict that are progressing this story forward. There's the conflict of being in an ill situation, with the death of your biological father and being enslaved by other people. There's the conflict of, can I get a dress in time? We set up these expectations so that we can lose them. We go to the ball knowing that we can't get caught, or that we can never actually be with the prince even though we seem perfect for each other, etc. So all of these conflicts are the things that drive the story forward. Some other generic stories we could look at is like boy meets girl, a typical romantic comedy sort of thing. We have a person who is, if we look at the purple line, a person who lives a pretty good life, an ordinary person in an ordinary world with a stable job, but maybe they're just missing something in their life, and they find the girl that completes their life and would make them truly happy, only to lose the girl. And then all of a sudden, despite the fact their life is otherwise the same, the absence of the love of their life makes them their life worse and worse and worse, to the point that they don't want to do their job anymore. They don't want to do anything except find this person until they reach a low point. Realizing they're at a low point, maybe a friend or someone like that motivates them to take drastic action. It pays off, and infinite happiness when they find the girl again. I could go through all of these stories, but you can see that it's conflict that ultimately drives them forward. There's one interesting one here that's in yellow: good news, bad news, and it's a relatively straight line. Sometimes stories can have a shape, and that shape is a straight line. There, one example, and it might also be the blue line here, is there are some famous stories like War and Peace, or anything from Francis Kepka. These are really, really depressing books. Animal Farm, 1984. These stories start off bad, and they just continue bad the whole way through. Having said that, there are moments of hope, and there are instances where they can't get caught, or else things will be extra worse for them. And it's even when these shapes are in one realm the entire time, it's still conflict, keeping the story engaging, driving it forward, giving it potential energy, and releasing it. Another really interesting and simple framework for using conflict in storytelling comes from South Park. South Park, whether you like them or not, it must be acknowledged that they are fantastic and efficient storytellers. Famously, the team at the studios in Comedy Central that work on South Park make episodes from scratch in record time. They can make an episode, I think the fastest they've ever made an episode is 3 days. And they often make episodes, it's the rule, not the exception, that they make stories in a week, basically from Monday to Saturday with 1 day off. And they are able to make these stories because they just have a very efficient, unmessy, unnoisy storytelling framework, and it revolves entirely around conflict and cause and effect. So what they do whenever they're mapping a story is they do the first draft, and on the second draft, they find wherever the story progresses only because of an and then sentence. And when that happens, they realize that they've missed an opportunity to be interesting. They've missed an opportunity to add conflict and to add agency to their characters and to be engaging. So you can imagine a story that's like, one day I woke up and then I brushed my teeth to get ready for the morning, and then I had breakfast, and then I got in the car, and then I got to work, and then I got yelled at by my boss, and then I came home. That's not a story. Although there are moments of conflict in there, like getting yelled at by my boss, there's many missed opportunities to have inserted words that work together, because instead they were bloated by and then moments. And then moments are the opposite of conflict. It's to progress the story without cause and effect, without any potential energy. And so what they do instead is whenever they see an and then, they replace it with a but, or they replace it with a therefore. So I woke up in the morning, but then I realized that my alarm didn't go off and I was significantly late for work. Therefore, I brushed my teeth in a mad hurry while eating breakfast at the same time, and that made the breakfast taste awful and the toothbrush ineffective. But then when I got in my car, I was running low on petrol, and so I had to drive the whole time in fear that the car was not going to get there. Therefore, when I got to the office, I was in an unkempt scramble, and I had an important client meeting that I was ill prepared for. Therefore, my boss yelled at me, but I ultimately won the pitch to the client despite my disheveled appearance. Therefore, I got a promotion and was able to go home a winner. That's a significantly more interesting, colourful, engaging, memorable story. And on a very lazy second draft, all I had to do was simply replace "and then" with "buts" and "therefore." And so this is a good way, a shortcut of introducing conflict and engagement in your stories, simply by starting sentences with these helpful words. Now we can try some activities for ourselves. So last week we used this exercise to learn visually descriptive language. Today we're going to stack these two skills on top of each other. We're going to speak in a visually descriptive way using the say what you see technique, but we're also going to add conflict in there. So level 1, I want you to say only what you can literally see in this image of a house, but what you're going to be describing are external conflicts only. So these are things which are in an unresolved, could get worse state in the house, things like cracks, instability, etc. You're going to set yourself a budget of time for storytelling, say 30 seconds to a minute. And if I were to have a go at this in 30 seconds, this is sort of what I would say. There is a 3-story house that is crumbling to the point of ruination. Surrounding this dilapidated, red, crumbling 3-story rusted house is a 2-meter high steel chained fence, which locks out anyone from entering this condemned space. The building is cracked, it's exposed, it could fall down at any moment, particularly the eastern tower, which is crumbling to the point of being sloped and bent and unstable. The windows are broken, entirely missing for reasons people have forgotten, and are boarded up by plain plywood borders. If I were to just use that as an example, I'm visually describing imperfections, flaws, things that are in an unresolved state about the house. Things that could get worse, like the fact that it could implode, it could slope over, etc., etc. And so that's an example of storytelling, say what you see, level 1. What it's designed to do is a few things to make you a better storyteller. 1, it builds a very strong mind-mouth connection where you're able to select from all the words that are in your vocabulary, the ones in particular that are likely to have an effect on the audience, such that you say it to them, they can see it themselves, and they can continue the story in their own mind themselves. A lot of people who are bad at this know the words they're trying to say, but their brain sort of moves faster than their mouth, and so they hesitate, and it doesn't come out very fluently in their mouth. And what you can do is you can have different prompt images and create that very strong mind-mouth connection. And by doing this, eventually you'll be able to speak without a script. You'll be able to tell stories very vividly simply by having an image in your head. But we start with how we see level 1, using a prompt image to be able to tell things in a storytelling-like way. We can upgrade to level 2. So in last week's episode, level 2 was where we had a prompt image that we spent 30 seconds on that, and then we spent 30 seconds talking about what the prompt image could look like. So what this house might have looked like when it was built and it was in a glorious state, or what it could look like if we reimagined it or rebuilt it. We're going to do a similar thing here by introducing conflict, but this time I want you to visually describe for a few seconds what we just did in the last session. So like, say what you see, the house on the outside, but then I want you to imagine a character walking inside the house and visually describe their internal conflicts. So the character's doubts, fears, hesitations, unanswered questions, etc. If I were to set a budget of time again for 30 seconds, and I were to do say what you see level 2, so I were to start with the character, I would do it like this. I'd say something like, Susan approached her deceased grandfather's house with grave apprehension. What was once her childhood home growing up was now unrecognizably desolate and dissolved, falling apart and severely sloped. As she entered the front door of the 3-story castle manor, inside was pitch blackness until her eyes adjusted to the dimly lit interior. She took one step forward, and floorboards cracked, burst, and fell into the abyss below her. She wondered why she was here in the first place. What is it that she needed to know about this house that compelled her to step inside? Why doesn't she simply turn around and forget this whole thing ever happened? So again, just an improvised story with a 30-second or so budget of time. All I'm doing is putting myself in the point of view of a character walking into this house, and I'm simply saying what I see about what's going on in their head and from their eyes. So I'm talking about internal conflicts because I'm talking about the situation she's in. Things like, she does something and how she reacts, and how she's in a state of, should I do this, should I do that when it happens. For instance, she steps on the floorboards, they burst, they fall down at the abyss. That's external conflict. But in her mind, it's, this place is dangerous. Should I turn back? Why am I here in the first place? Those are internal conflicts. And you'll notice, hopefully as a listener, that is more engaging than if we were to say simply, I entered the house, it was dark and scary. And so being able to control these details and have that strong mind-mouth connection is something that we can learn. And if you were to practice this for 20 minutes to an hour every day for, say, 4 days in a row, by the 4th day, you would be able to do this very effortlessly, and you would be a natural storyteller. It is a skill that can be learned surprisingly quickly. Time to say what you see level 3. We know that in Say What You See level 3, and from the last episode, we take away the prompt image and we try to tell these stories from memory or simply by conjuring the image in our own head. And so that's why I've taken the image away. I have to now do Say What You See level 1 and 2, but without the benefit of a prompt image. So here I would visually describe the house and the character and the external and internal conflicts that arise. I'm also going to take it one step further and introduce growing conflict. So I'm going to describe the character progressing further into the house, and because something happened, a domino effect takes place. An example of that would be she takes a step forward, the door behind her suddenly slams and it's locked. Now what? Now she doesn't have the benefit of a two-way door that she can go in and out of. She's now committed to this house. She then hears a sound. The house is haunted or inhabited by something. Again, the audience's mind now has a domino effect of things that go wrong. And so by telling that story, we'll see that all elements of our storytelling skill sets are coming together really nicely. Visual descriptions, internal conflicts, growing conflicts. The story now has so many hooks in it that it's going to be very hard for audiences not to be interested in what happens next. And that's how we've hit success as a storyteller. Similar to a comedian telling a joke and hearing laughter, a storyteller that can conjure these images and these unanswered questions in the audience's head, and the audience is saying something back, which is that they're really hooked and wondering what happens next. That's how a storyteller knows they're speaking successfully. And you can try this with lots of different prompt images. So the house image is a really detailed, busy, and full-on image. There's lots of things that you can look at and speak about. But then we can dial it back and pick an image that has less to talk about, like a cinema or a birthday party or a wedding or someone training alone in a dark basketball court or a group fitness class or someone going about their job as a florist or a haircut or being sick on the couch with a cat or packing your bags for a holiday or being in court or a Nike commercial. And so all of these slides are available for you to practice your Say What You See with conflict level 1, level 2, level 3. And again, you practice this for 20 minutes to an hour on increasingly difficult and different images. You'll eventually find that by, say, day 4 of doing this, you'll be quite a potent and effortless storyteller. And so in summary, that's what we're learning about today. if we apply all the skills we've learned so far to this storytelling circle framework, now when we describe a character in their ordinary world, in the first topic, you, we can not only visually describe what we see, but we can also visually describe the conflicts that are present. And so because of this, we can tell and also retell and reimagine stories in a really different, engaging, and interesting way. If we were to quickly retell The Lion King by adding not only visual descriptions, but conflicts as well, it might start something like this. The sun rises on the Pride Lands, a green, lush animal kingdom. Also waking up is Simba, a young, enthusiastic, petulant, mischievous lion cub. He sits at the top of Pride Rock next to his large, mature father, the Lion King. Mufasa is the Lion King. He says to Simba, "What does it mean to be king?" And Simba replies, "Getting to do whatever you want." Mufasa scoffs. "You'll learn more when you're older," he says. As the story progresses, we can start to add in more conflicts, like the idea that Simba goes to a canyon that he's told expressly not to go to, but curiosity gets the better of him and he does go to it. By going there, a race breaks out where a stampeding horde of wildebeests chases after him. They get closer and closer and closer. It looks like he's going to be trampled to death, only to be suddenly snatched away by who? His father, who scolds him for being there in the first place, who then throws him to rescue, only to be thrown into the wildebeests by his treacherous brother Scar. We can continue the story basically with all of those conflicts. So the external conflicts being, the fights, the arguments, the physical betrayal. The internal conflicts being Simba hesitating, like, I'm not told not to go there, but I'm going to go there anyway. Questions that he gets wrong. And the growing conflicts being things like, now that you might have Scar, for example, tell a lie to the kingdom that Simba and Mufasa were horribly destroyed in an accident. But then when Simba comes back, it turns out that lie was the only thing holding people under loyalty to Scar. And then when that lie breaks out, suddenly the whole pride turns against him. And that's an example of like a growing conflict being created in, say, the go sentence, and then paying off extremely well in the arrive sentence when Simba comes back to restore order to the Pride Lands. And so this would be an example of retelling the story with all the visual descriptions and conflicts that we've learned so far included in this powerful storytelling framework. I hope you've enjoyed this episode too. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of skills to learn here. By going through this course slowly and doing the exercises that I've set out, you can gain a lot of practical skills which you can use for any conference talk you've got coming up to become a more engaging speaker and storyteller. And if you want more coaching, by all means, contact me on my website, tomhendrick.com, where there's always lots of free coaching, courses, and classes. We have lots of deals to make public speaking accessible, fun, and really practical. So I hope to see you soon. Thanks again for watching episode 2. My name is Tom Hendrick. I'll see you in episode 3 when we do a bigger deep dive on the theory and practice of storytelling.